Okay, this is just a quick video on what we need to do if we are going to go set up some acoustic monitoring for bats. So first of all, our guest speaker really covered this well, right? Why might we want to survey for bats? We might be concerned about disease prevalence. We might be concerned about baseline data before a disease hits, as far as how many bats did we have before white nose syndrome hit Colorado versus how many after. We might be concerned whether wind power can go up in an area or whether or not there's already roosting bats in an area. We might be concerned with changes in population with habitat alterations. Climate change just throws in so many wrenches into all of our knowledge about wildlife. So again, a lot of this really is looking at presence absence information that might help us answer some of the questions we have related to any of these other topics. So there are a few different types of surveys. Stationary passive survey. That's what we're going to be doing actually in this class, but you deploy detectors at a sampling site for 1 or more nights, and it's at a fixed location. So that's the stationary piece, and the passive is that you're letting it sit. Then you also have mobile monitoring, and there's a variety of ways to do this. You may drive a transect and have a microphone fixed to a slow-moving vehicle, recording the sounds that are coming in, the echolocation sounds coming in. That may be something that is recording those sounds, or you can also use less expensive technology in which you can just hear those clicks from a bat as it goes through, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you here in a minute anyway. But you may drive around an area and in the evening or maybe just after sunset and listen and see where you're hearing bats in order to determine where to set your stationary passive device. You may do colony counts. If you do know of a roosting colony, you may go on there during the day when they're all roosted up and just simply count how many are there, or take a picture and count it later. That might be in a roost site in the summer. It might be in a hibernaculum or a hibernating site in the winter. It might be in a maternity colony just after the females have their young. Okay, so let's talk about the techniques for choosing your site. First of all, you have with the passive site selection, you have a few options, and it depends on what your objectives of your study are. If you really want just broad scale information, you just may randomly sample a really large area. But if you're really trying to get fine scale, the chances are you're going to need to target specific habitat features, which would make it a non-random study. So let's talk about that broad scale random study first. And again, Jeremy mentioned this in his presentation too. But the North American Bat Association, I think is what it's called, but there is a continent-wide effort to coordinate a study identifying locations of bats, and they're using the same equipment that we're using in our class. And so what they did is they essentially took the entire continent and gridded it out into 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer grids, which on a finer scale would look like this. And then at an even finer scale, you would have an area, a survey area in mind. Maybe it's an entire state. Maybe it's a large county, maybe it's a national park. And you pull that area out and you say, I'm in charge of this area and I need to sample 30 squares, essentially 30 of these different grids within my sampling area. And you have a computer spit out which cells you should monitor. So for example, every one of these cells has a number, 108, 428, 636. So it's a grid number, and you can put into the computer system your range of grid cells and say I need 30, and it'll randomly spit 30 out. And you can see some are close together, some are farther apart. So for example, example, cell number 108 is right here. Cell number 428 would be this one right here, 636, 1132, and then even down here we get into this one that wasn't selected, 3372. So it gives you an idea of you have no say over where these samples are put. Now, there are some significant problems with this method. Let's start with what works really well about this method. Well, when you do a non-random sample, you are not biasing your data. So you aren't saying, I am going to avoid sampling certain areas, or I'm going to target certain areas. It is all random. So just by chance, you may get no bats showing up in any of these grids because maybe none of these grids have good bat habitat, right? Just by chance. And that can be a problem, right? But also, if you were to say, you know what, I'm going to sample a lot maybe just down here, and I'm not going to sample over here because I don't think it's good habitat, you may be biasing your data and you may miss something that you didn't know could exist in that area. So it's not that one method is better than the other, but if you really want statistically valid numbers of populations, things like that, you generally want to stick to a non-random sample. But with this method, it also presents the challenge of just by chance, these cells may be in inaccessible areas. You think about some of the peaks in Rocky Mountain National Park. They could be in one of these grids, and yeah, maybe there's bats there, but you can't get there. And so you have no ability with this particular technique to avoid the areas that are completely inaccessible. Now, I'm sure there's modeling programs where that you could block out certain areas to avoid some of those pitfalls. So, but this is what is going on in this large continent-wide study, and they're monitoring these same locations and trying to get a continental scale approach to where different bat species are occurring. What we're going to do is this non-random passive technique, and that allows you to place your monitors in places that are the most likely to have the bats. And the theory there would be, if they're not in these good habitat spots, they're probably not in the larger area. But that is an assumption, and it's an important place to start, but it wouldn't be what you'd want to base every conclusion upon. It does, however, allows you to monitor maybe some sites over time to see if there's changes in activity from different bats in certain places. So you might place these in a riparian system in a City Fort Collins natural area, and for 10 years you're getting little brown bat calls on your monitor, and then in year 11 there's none. That could be very informative that maybe something has changed with that little brown bat population. It also allows sites to be chosen that are more accessible than that by chance non-random location. It may not give valid population estimates, again, because you're biasing where you're putting your sampling equipment, so you can't extrapolate that out to a larger area. But what it can give for sure is presence-absence data. I want to make one comment on monitoring. The idea of monitoring is that you're coming back to the same site time and time again in order to detect any changes, versus an assessment is a point in time approach where you are not expecting to come back and return to that site. Just a couple sampling words there. So, if you're using this non-random passive technique, we need to know, well, where would it be good to get a good recording? And before we do that, I want to show you what the recording equipment looks like. Okay, it looks like I can't show you on this one, so I'll have to start a new recording and show you in a minute. But basically, you have a little microphone that you're going to collect sound from, and so it's important that you don't collect this interfering clutter. And so the microphone is very sensitive, and any kind of background noise can be clutter. So some things to avoid would be the sound of water or roads. The reason why buildings can be clutter is because as those bats fly near the building, their echolocation is going to bounce off the building or off that hard surface and then come back as clutter to the microphone. When you have a whole lot of bats, you're not going to be able to distinguish one call from another, and so it can get really cluttered and difficult to pick out on the software. So instead, you want to choose like edge between two habitat lines, or like distinct areas that an animal would be moving through. So just like a terrestrial animal, the bat's going to choose the line of least resistance with flying too, right? And so if you have a line of trees and then an open area, that would be a good place to point your microphone, because those bats might fly right along that edge. Place at a short distance from the pond. The reason for that is a couple fold. First of all, if the pond or water has an inlet and is making noise, that could be your clutter. But also, you're going to get more bats flying through there. So having it a little bit away, you're going to decrease the feeding echolocation calls that you're going to get, and less clutter from multiple bats kind of swarming over that water. A natural entrance to a pond is a good one. As they're going to approach for feeding, you think about all the insects that are flying over a pond. Insects are food to our microchiropterans in Colorado, and so that's why we're focusing on these water sources. Okay, so a couple pictures to make this make sense. What we have here in the black box with the blue around it is a location for the detector, and you know, some different descriptions of like features on the landscape and how to place your detector. So if you have kind of an opening among the trees, this nice big meadow just right in the middle might be a good place. If you have a moving body of water, having that detector pointed kind of angled into the water or away, but not straight across the water, that would be a good place, and a little bit off, but doesn't have to be too far. And a pond set back just a little bit. And then here we have like a road or a trail, and maybe on the edge of that frequently traveled road or two-track, because that's going to be a nice clearing even in the canopy for the bats to be moving between. Here we have it with some distances, so about 5 meters from a pond, and 5 meters or around 15 feet seems to be the sweet spot. And the direction on the box is the direction that the microphone would be pointing. So you'd point it straight at the water. In this example, they have it pointing straight at the stream. Here they have it pointing away from the trees, because you don't think the bats aren't flying this direction, they're flying here in front of the trees. And if you had a roost, you don't want to point it directly at the roost, because you'll just get so much clutter. So point it kind of 45 degrees or even 90 degrees away from where they would be coming out of a roost. And a roost may even be something like a bridge, an underpass, a tunnel, a culvert, a big cottonwood tree with really thick bark. Lots of options for where to roost around here. And then here's some pictures that demonstrate what we just said. And the other thing to keep in mind is you can angle. So usually you're going to elevate this microphone on a pole. Again, I'll show you this in the field. And then you'll angle the microphone toward the direction that you want. So in this case, they have it angled down. Here they have it kind of on the edge of this. You have this kind of canyony country coming through. So they're probably coming through there, and then they might open up here. So they have it kind of pointed down toward the stream in the mouth of that opening. And on the edge of kind of a still water, again, maybe pointing it either out and maybe down. In this one, because the bats are probably not flying really low, they have the camera angled up, or the microphone angled up. And if you're up against a cliff face, you're going to want to put it about mid-slope and point the microphone away from the canyon opening and away from the cliff. So you can see this dotted black line just barely with an arrow. That's the direction that they would put it there. So I will follow this up with a short video showing you the equipment.